So hello and welcome. Happy Friday. Today is Friday, October the 22nd, and this is Backyard Beekeeping Questions and Answers, episode number 130. I'm Frederick Dunn, and this is The Way to Bee. So I'm glad that you're here. Thank you for joining us. And if you're a podcast listener, sorry last week I did not produce a video. Had a cold. Was coughing all the time. So I put up a regular video instead. If you want to know what we're going to talk about today, please look down in the video description below and you'll see line item by line item exactly what's going on, along with some valuable informational links. So that if you need to follow up on things, that's pretty much it. So what else is going on? What's the temperature outside? 47 degrees Fahrenheit. It's miserable out there, which is 8 degrees Celsius, and we've had a lot of rain. And I went out there and looked at my tiny hive that was being attacked by yellow jacket wasps yesterday. And guess what? This morning, yep, yellow jackets are still attacking it. Very challenging situations. Although out of 21 colonies, to have one of them being pinged on like that by yellow jackets is not terrible. A lot of people wanted to know, hey Fred, why aren't you trapping those yellow jackets? I have traps out all the time. We empty them daily. They're filling up. There's a lot of yellow jackets this year. What we have low sightings of are the European hornets, although they have a tree that has European hornets in it that I'm observing, and I did extensive videos on that. And I want to see how late in the year they survive in that tree before they get cold and then don't make it. And I'm also going to collect a bunch of their queens as they come out. So that's interesting too. That's about a 15-minute drive to the north of me. And what else is going on? They still have pollen coming in, surprising, and some of the bees were flying even though it's so cold outside and overcast. So they're bringing in pollen from some of the late asters, which are kind of the purple colored asters, and then we also have cosmos. This is the first year I planted them. I've talked about them a lot. And here we are at the end of October, and the cosmos flowers, 2.5 acres of them, are still producing pollen that the bees, a lot of different pollinators are bringing in, but specifically my honeybees, and they're a high-ranking nectar source as well. So I'm going to be planting those again next year. Cosmos, really good stuff. Eden Brothers, they're on sale right now, not specifically Cosmos, but at Eden Brothers, which I have no affiliation with. They have a discount going on today over the next 24 hours for anything you buy there. So that's about it. Let's jump right into the very first question, which is from John Shannon. Fantastic. I don't have Facebook, so I couldn't post there to report my experience, but the hive gates, these things, have worked great for me here in the coastal Pacific Northwest. We have millions of yellow jackets this time of year. In the past, I've lost entire strong colonies when hundreds of yellow jackets attack at once. Last year on Halloween, I watched them destroy 3 hives completely. They beheaded thousands of bees. This year, the yellow jackets have completely failed. They tried for 2 solid weeks and the bees held them off. I'm not entirely sure why it works. I always reduce my entrances in the fall before the annual yellow jacket onslaught, but they overwhelm the guard bees. The hive gates have a larger entrance, but somehow the bees can defend it. My mysteries of the Hymenoptera. Thanks, Fred, for the product review. So what he's talking about is, in the video that I posted yesterday and the day before, tiny underdog colony, which was a late season swarm. So in August, there was a swarm of bees on the ground, one of those little tiny ones. And I used a Colorado bee vac, and I vacuumed them up, and there was a queen with them, and I put them in a hive all by themselves. So they are by far the smallest colony of bees in my apiary, and late season swarms, generally, most people don't bother with them. But if you want to watch yesterday's video, it's about these units, and I took a scope and I ran it through to show you kind of the wasp eye view of it, and I also showed you what the bees do when they get inside and how they handle wasp intruders. Once you're inside the hive, it was very convincing and interesting and exciting and sad for people to watch because bees were dying, but more wasps than bees were dying. And I was out there this morning, and as I mentioned, the wasps are flying around. Some bees are foraging, but there's a bunch of dead wasps in front of that particular hive. In fact, it's the only hive in my apiary that has a bunch of dead wasps in front of it, which means those are the ones that are really getting into stinger to stinger conflicts with those wasps. So that's a really good report from John Shannon, Northwestern United States, where the wasps are a huge problem. And this is a very consistent report that we're getting. If you want to join our citizen science evaluation of the hive gate entrances and give your input and learn about stuff, we have a fellowship on Facebook, and we also have a page on my website, and there are 3 videos there from the inventor that I took off of his YouTube, and that's called BIQ Solutions. So if you want to check that out yourself and see what's going on, the early reports are really good, and I don't have a bottom line recommendation on them yet because what's yet to come? The winter time, and that's what I want to see, how well they do through winter. So that's what we're doing, that's what's going on, and that's what's in the environment right now, and the colonies are looking strong. Question number 2 comes from Dean Welter. I was curious if you have heard of or ever tried using the boric acid and apple juice method to stop yellow jackets from raiding your hives. There are YouTube videos about it. I found out about it just this year, and after using it, I was amazed how well it worked. I have 4 hives in one location, and after putting out 2 containers near the hives with the mixture in them, the yellow jackets and the bald-faced hornets were gone in a couple of days, and honeybees completely ignored the stuff. Simple recipe. Here's the thing, because I get this question a lot. Fred, why are you letting those yellow jackets attack your bees? Well, I'm not letting them attack. I'm observing and learning from them. So, the other thing is, some people get concerned and think, why do you like the yellow jackets and the hornets so much? It's not that I like them. I want to learn about them. But here's the other thing. I have put out videos showing how to kill wasps and how to trap them. And then the formulas that I use, there's a dish that has views well over 1 million where I set out my formula and collect yellow jackets. Now here's the thing. Other people say, dude, you're not really having much of an impact on the yellow jackets if that's the way you're killing them. You got to go after the nest. You got to kill the nest. And then on the flip side of that, we have people that are like, why are you trying to kill all these great pollinators and pest control agents and everything else? Well, let me just explain my position on it, and I'm going to use this question to answer that. The reason I don't put out a formula that the wasps themselves would take back to their nests and then kill them, it's not my desire to wipe out the wasps in the environment. It isn't. So what my goal is to reduce pressure on the bees in my specific apiary and reduce the wasp pressure, and we do that, it's a multi-leveled measure. One is to set out traps so the foraging wasps that come into this area check in, but they don't check out, like the old Roach Hotel commercials that we used to have. So I like them to get trapped, bogged down in the, in the soup, and then they just don't leave. I have no desire to wipe out the entire nest unless that wasp nest is in the vicinity of my apiary or where people walk, because I'm also a photographer. So I do a lot of portraiture right here, and I can't have a bunch of angsty wasps out there ready to attack and sting people this time of year when everything is desperate for resources in the environment. So that's why I don't put out, boric acid methods and all these other things in the videos where I demonstrate and test and evaluate lures for wasps, yellow jacket wasps and things like that, as well as trap evaluations. We look at the effectiveness of the trap, the effectiveness of the lure, and for me the win is when there aren't a bunch of honeybees in there with them. So I am in favor of trapping. I am against sending out a chemical that will kill the parent nest somewhere where I don't really know where that's located and what the end result is. So that's why I don't do that. And there are university studies that put all that stuff out, and more than enough resources online for people to look at taking out entire nests with poisons and toxins, and hopefully they're targeted specifically at those insects. But one of the most frustrating things I had when I was reviewing one of these wasp traps is I look at other people that had reviewed it also and celebrating how great it worked and caught all the wasps, and the pictures that they had were traps full of nothing but honeybees. And it goes the other way too. Some people look at every flying insect that's stinging and they'll point at wasps and go, look at those bees. We have bees in our yard. We have a whole bunch of bees attacking everybody. And what they really are talking about would be a nest of paper wasps or yellow jackets, bald-faced hornets, or even the European hornets, which a lot of people are mistaking for the Asian giant hornet, which right now is only in the state of Washington. So that's why I don't do that. I'm not, trying to help the wasps along, but that's where the hive gates come in, because the ultimate perfect scenario would be that every single beehive can launch its own natural defense against predators that are trying to get in through their entrances, and that's what that entrance helps them do. So if we can do that, then we don't have to worry about trapping wasps, other than if they're a problem for you personally as a person in your picnic area and things like that, where this time of year they're in your face. Question number 3, moving right along, Mark Vance from Piatt, Arkansas. Just acquired 2 hives and they appear to be sugar syrup bound. I didn't see the queens, eggs, or larvae and will wait 7 days or so to check again. Should I take a couple of frames and extract nectar and place in brood box, or will they correct it on their own provided they have a laying queen? Thanks for all you do. Okay, so here's the thing. A lot of beehives this time of year become honey bound, nectar bound, and the difference is unfinished honey, open cells, occupies a lot of space inside your hive. And because we're also at the time of year when we're condensing the hives down, so we're trying to maximize the population of bees in the hives and not have wasted space in there. So it seems natural if we're looking and everything looks right, everything looks healthy. And by the way, you're not alone, Mark. There's a lot of people in the exact same situation right now. Their hives are full of resources, honey, capped, pollen, things like that, and little or no brood, and they appear to be, so for those of you who don't know what it is to be nectar bound or honey bound, that means all the available cells are filled with resources right now, no place for the queen to lay. So it means that you still have a queen, you still have nurse bees, you still have a complete colony of bees that's otherwise healthy. And so would I pull out frames full of honey to make space available for the queen to lay her eggs? And this is something, by the way, this is just an opinion now, see? So in different parts of the country, things work differently, but this is my take on it. This happens for me this time of year. Brood gets reduced, and by the way, it's a bonus, and I'll explain why. The brood gets reduced, or there's no evidence of brood. But you've got a queen, especially if you've marked her, and I highly recommend you either purchase your queens marked, or if you've got your own queens, learn to mark them. Great information for your records when you know the queen stock that you have and how old it is. So anyway, they're in there and things are cooling off right now, and the environment's not providing nectar and it's not providing enough pollen to really kick things off. So what's going to happen? Well, they're going to cluster around, the center areas of the hive, and if you pull out a solid frame of honey, you took away a source of heat and insulation for the bees. Now, the honey itself doesn't heat up, that's not what I'm saying, but the bees clustering around solid frames of honey warm the honey. The honey acts as a heat bank, so a heat sink kind of. It absorbs the warmth from the bees and it gives the bees something to be up against that's solid, and they warm the honey. Now, in the nighttime, when the resources aren't coming in, there's nothing new, right? They're going to have to consume some of that honey that the cluster is centered on in order to survive, to stay warm. And then they will be opening up cells as they use up the honey resources stored in the cells. So then as those cells become available, guess what the queen gets to do? Lay her eggs in there. And where's it located? In the center of the cluster, right where we want those bees to be laying their eggs. And hopefully by now this differs in different parts of the United States and different parts of the world, but seasonally, as the winter dearth comes upon us, they hopefully already have made their fat-bodied winter bees, and those are in there as well, and they don't do any foraging or anything. They're just waiting to care for brood. And it's actually, in my opinion, better to leave those resources in the hive right now and not pull them out, because when you pull out a frame full of honey and you extract it, and then you put it back in, now they have an air space, and there's no resources coming in to fill that, and there's no guarantee the queen is going to lay a bunch of eggs in there, and they may not have enough pollen to take care of the brood that they're going to rear there too. So how many frames of pollen are there and things like that? So the other resources might also be in decline. So what you could have done by pulling out a solid frame of honey is just created an airspace where once there was the potential for a heating and a fuel resource, so physical heating improvement, solid frames of honey, and then a food resource, the carbohydrate, the stored honey. So I say leave them in. And that's what I do here. So the other end of that is that if you are broodless right now and you've got a queen and everything else, what do you think I'm going to suggest that you do? oxalic acid vaporization to deliver a solid blow to those terrible Varroa destructor mites that are sure to be in your hive. So it matters what your hive counts have been right after your nectar flow, right after you pulled your honey from the supers and everything, and now we're going into winter with those resources. If you're broodless, the first thing that comes to mind for me is it's an easy single treatment to take out the bulk of those mites with over a 90% efficacy. So you could slap them down with one treatment. Forget all that multiple treatments week after week. When you're broodless, now's the time. Because most people wait until the end of November, 1st of December, where I live. That's where they're guaranteed to be broodless. We'll talk a little bit more about that later, but that's my recommendation. Question number 4 from Robin Coolidge, Ohio, Columbus. Will this be your first winter with the hive gates? Do you have any concern about the bees being able to clear dead bees from the gate over winter? I've asked this in several forums and have not gotten a good answer. Well, probably the reason that there aren't a lot of good answers about the hive gates is because this is our first winter with them. So I'm evaluating these, and of course there will be a link down in the video description here that will take you to the HiveGate page that we have for citizen science for those to give feedback and everything. But the feedback, I'm going to tell you, is positive so far. But this is a question that comes out all the time. This is the part of the HiveGate that sticks out in the front of your entrance. People have concerns, so you've got all of this channel here that's covered inside the hive, and here's the opening, which should be underneath your winter cluster. That's why it's on a pivot, so you can angle it towards your clusters to the east inside the hive. You may not know that, but I use thermal cameras to do that. Anyway, when it comes time to find out if it's clogged with dead bees, if a bunch of dead bees pile up here, then what I'm going to do is not use this hole right here to put a screw through, which is what you're supposed to do, so that then this pivots while this sticks to the outside of the hive, so you'd be looking down on top of it. I'm leaving these not secured that way, and what I noticed when I put a borescope into my hive is that they've already run little propolis edges around this where it sits on the solid bottom board. And I'm going to put a hook in here. It can be just a hanger or something, and you pull it right out. Shake all the dead bees out. Put it right back in. So that's what I'm going to do. And we don't know till we get through the first winter how well it's going to work. But that's what I plan to do. First of all, look if there's airflow, thermal scans of the face of the hive, reach in, hook that, pull this out, maybe even have another one ready to go. Pull the dirty one out, push a clean one in, and then leave it right there. And then go and clean this or sanitize it, whatever you want to do. So I have multiples, and that's yet to be determined, and that's probably why a lot of people don't have opinions about it yet. We haven't been through a winter. Question number 5. Patrick Kushki, Sugar Grove, PA. I have a question about the lesser of two evils. I have a Kenya top bar hive and a Layens hive. About a week ago, I did a sugar roll mite test and happened to notice that both hives had built comb on all of their bars and frames, with the outermost bars and frames about 70% complete. I decided the bees might appreciate a little more space. The sun was shining and I was feeling optimistic. So an additional empty bar at the end of each hive, and did the same for the Layens and with other frame at each end. Now, in hindsight, I'm worried that I'm sending the bees into the winter with too much space. My question is, which is worse, leave them with extra space at the ends of their hives, or open up the hives, potentially compromising the sealed propolis, letting the air cool, etc. Me personally, I pull those empty frames out. We want as many full frames as possible going into winter. We're still going to have some warm days. You might want to get in there and pull those empty frames and get them back to sized right for the bees that occupy the hive. Question number 6, Nancy, Harleysville, PA. Not sure if you covered this in the past. How do you set up your winter inner cover to hold the rapid round with sugar? I'm leery about the large cover creating too much condensation and the bees not having access to the moisture. If it stays in the holding tank, part of the rapid round, can you show us exactly how you configure it? I use deep winter inner cover with no upper entrance. Part 2, I like your hive ID numbers. Okay, so here's the thing. This is the insulated inner cover going into my first winter with these. I have high hopes because in theory, this thing is going to work great. This is an R10 insulation, sits in this plastic tray. This thing itself sits on top of your 8 or your 10 frame Langstroth boxes. You have these little pegs extending down here. Now some people are confused about this, so I'm going to cover it real quick right now. When you sit this on an 8 frame, the box that sits on top of this, your feeder shim, if you're putting a feeder space up here, is going to be a 10 frame, even though the boxes below might be 8 frame. It needs to be 10 frame so it covers the full width and sets on the shoulders of these little wings that stick out here. Now the other thing is you have this little black cover that is sitting in the little recess here, and then there's an opening. This is your feeder opening, which can be closed with the cover or left open, and if it's open, that means you got to put a feeder on top of it. So we talk about the rapid rounds. So remember, there would be a wooden box around this, a 10 frame, no matter if this is sitting on an 8 or 10 frame box. These rapid rounds have a hole in the middle. That hole just happens to be the exact same diameter as the top of this channel here. So you line that up, it sits right on top of there. And I've showed in the past that if you have one of those center tubes that extends down a little bit below the rapid round, then you just cut an 1.5 inch diameter hole in a piece of 3/4 inch wood. You put that piece on here with a hole centered over that, and then you put your extended tube right down into that, and then it matches up. The other thing is the better rapid round feeders, and this is becoming difficult to locate. They're really good material that's made well. If you notice, the lids are a little bit domed on the top. So that has a practical reason, a practical purpose, and that is the smooth underside of that. So when it's domed up, condensation is going to rise through the center of your rapid round feeder because there's a lot of heat being generated down below and it has to go somewhere. So heat's going to rise through this hole. Your clear cover is removed for winter, and all you're going to do is pour your 4-pound bag of sugar right into this tray. Now your bees come up through here. They have open access for the whole thing. Don't add any water to that, and I'll explain why. I think we have another question coming up that's relevant to this. But when you put the cover on, the condensation comes up through the hole, collects on the interior surface of this cover that is convex, and the more convex, the better. Then the little driplets that collect up here will run on the interior to the side and then down into this tray. And then of course that contributes moisture, which by the way, your bees need in order to process the dry cane sugar that you're going to have in here. And that's it. Dry cane sugar, bees climb up, get over here, and they need the moisture to metabolize the sugar. So it's really that simple. And then so this just keeps air from flowing through. So condensation will form up in here, and it will turn your loose sugar that you start this time of year. There's no reason not to go ahead and just configure it now and have it for emergency feed just in case they need it. If they don't need that in spring, then all you have to do is add water to that and mix it up, and now you have sugar syrup again for kicking them off in spring if they don't have enough honey resources still in the hive. So I hope that answers that question. It's pretty straightforward. But there was some confusion about what size feeder shim to put on top of the insulated inner covers. Those are by BeeSmart Designs, and we're evaluating those. So the jury's still out. We're going to look at those through winter. But any insulation on your hive would be best used. If you're only going to insulate one part of your hive, the cover comes first. And the insulated inner cover, even better, because we've had the BeeMax polystyrene outer covers that are used on all of my Langstroth style hives last year. The only hives that don't have these insulated covers on them now would be, of course, the Long Langstroth hive, which has an insulated inner cover built into it now, and of course the Layens hive, which I had to insulate myself. So these are going on all of my standard Langstroth hives. So that's going to help the bees control that capsule of heat up above, and that's well established through the latest scientific research about thermodynamics inside the hive. So that should take care of that. And the last question was, I like your ID tags. Where did you get them? Those are the little brass ID tags that I now have on the fronts of all my hives, so that when I'm videoing or photographing or I'm documenting any kind of hive activity, I have a unique number there. And what those really are is solid brass tags that are designed to be on valve wheels. So in some big industrial complex where you have a whole bunch of different valves, you've got this tag out sheet and all these valve controls and prints and charts They're solid brass and they're etched, and I'll put a link to those down in the video description. They're super handy. They're solid brass, and the numbers go up, probably. If you're a backyard beekeeper, you probably don't have a pile of hives. I only have 21 colonies this year, which is, for me, is a high number. My preference is 10. But the numbers keep going up, and that's because instead of they're not 1 through 21, because over the years I've had more than 21 colonies. So what this is going to allow me to do is each year when I add a different colony and get rid of an old one, I assign a new number. So in other words, I wouldn't have repeats of hive number 1 and 2 and 3 and 4, for example. It would continue to go up through the years until over my lifetime I would have had some 90 hives or whatever, even though at the time I might only have 15 colonies, if that makes sense. So for record keeping, there's no redundancy in numbers. Number 7 from Shane, New Jersey. Can you give us your thoughts, pros, cons, regarding these different ways to feed over winter? Candy, cooked, it says. A lot of people like to cook stuff for their bees, and this is what I suggest, and this is backyard beekeeping, so we're not industrial people. I also recommend that you don't have to buy winter feed for your bees. You don't need winter patties. You don't need things like that. When you're cooking, when you create a fondant, all right, you have, if you're not one of these very good cooks that follows parameters exactly, you risk creating inverted sugar that could be detrimental or hazardous to your bees' health. So, I am always on the side of failing safe. So, forget the cooked stuff, forget the fondant and things like that, unless you know for sure that you're going to have the appropriate temperatures achieved. There's not going to be any burning of it. You're going to have the exact amount of time that you're going to hold it at the appropriate temperature, and you can cool it down in time, but you risk creating a toxin for your bees. So, I'll take the risk out. Don't cook your sugars. So you have 2 choices here. The next one is sugar bricks, not cooked, and raw sugar. So sugar bricks, those are the best. If you're going to put, we just talked about the Rapid Round, you can just pour sugar right out of your cane sugar bag, and that's processed white sugar. That has been proven to be the sucrose that your bees will benefit from the most going through winter and have to go to the bathroom the least. So energy, no bathroom situation, and so on, because they need warm days so the bees can fly out and do cleansing flights and eliminate their bowels. So if they can't empty their gut, the things that we're putting into the bees during wintertime puts them at risk or creates stress in the bees. So we want to provide them energy that does not require that they go to the bathroom more than they otherwise should. So sugar bricks are just white sugar that you've added enough moisture to where the sugar clumps together. Think of sugar cubes, that you put in your tea back in the day. 1 lump or 2 kind of thing. So you're just adding water to it, and then you're letting your loose granulated sugar form a brick or a block. So what's the advantage to that over just pouring your sugar into that Rapid Round feeder? Well, then if you've just got a feeder shim, and then you've got the backs of your bee frames, so you're up in the super, you're on top of the super. Some people like to feed directly over the brood box, but the space between the brood box and your super may not be adequate. So I like to put surplus emergency feeding right on top of your top box that has honey in it going into winter, and you need to create a feeder shim there so that you have the space to put these sugar blocks or sugar bricks in, and then you can actually set those, because they're in block form, directly on those frames. So it doesn't come apart and fall down into the hive, and then your bees actually, if you just pour loose sugar on your frames, and I've seen some people do that, the bees just run the sugar out because they like to have their source controlled in set locations and everything else. The other thing is those sugar bricks that you put in there, our moisture is going to condense on them too and just make them even more like a block of candy. The next question is raw sugar. Raw sugar should be avoided. And the reason is there's a lot of ash in it, and there's even molasses sometimes used in the production of raw sugar. I mean, it sounds good. Raw organic sugar, sometimes you look at it and it's brown, it's tan, whatever. That's to be avoided when feeding your bees in winter, and that's because there's more material in it other than sugar. We want pure sucrose for the bees if we can. And so we want the bees not to have dysentery in winter. So raw sugar has things in it that we don't want to feed our bees. So cane sugar, dry sugar bricks, composed from cane sugar, uncooked, is your safest bet. Number 8, Neil Burchell. Burchell? Neil. Let's see. Interesting video as usual. I have a question about overwintering bees. When forager bees bring nectar to the hive, a storekeeper bee takes the nectar, puts it into the honey cell. Is this the same in reverse when the bees are clustered for winter and feed off their honey reserves? There are what I call them water girl bees. There are workers inside the cluster. Now what happens when they cluster once they're in wintertime? The oldest bees are on the outside, so they're all, that's the exterior, the defensive layer, that's the insulation. Those are the expendables that are on the outside there. Those are the ones that are going to die off first. And as you progress through your cluster towards the interior, there's going to be the queen. Your most valuable bees are in the middle of the cluster, warmed by the other bees. And that's where your fat-bodied winter bees are, which are nurse bees, which are loaded with nutrition, and they're capable of caring for the brood through winter, and they last several months, where your worker bees are going to be dying off in weeks. So this mantle that's established by these outer bees. Now, those are the ones that leave the hive even, for example, that get water. Like when you get these warm days and there's 2 feet of snow outside, but it hits 37 degrees, and in the sun it's warmer than that, and you see some of the snow melting a little bit, you'll see bees on the snow collecting water. And then those bees will fly into the hive, and Dr. Seeley made some great observations about this, Tom Seeley. Those water bees show up and they just get mobbed by the other bees. So they are transferring then the water that they've gathered from outside, and all the bees on the interior of the hive need water. So there are other things regarding the honey resources, right? So there are other jobs going on in winter. There are heater bees, and these are bees that nose into the cells that are open, especially in your brood areas, because that's where your critical temperatures are achieved. And their thorax heats up because they're vibrating their muscles. They're not flapping their wings, but they're the same muscles that kind of like disengage from the wings, so they shiver and buzz and generate warmth. And you can see them when you look at them with a thermal scope. There's all these little hot spots around. And they actually kind of burn themselves out. They do that for up to 20 minutes at a time, sometimes a little more, a little less. But when they rest, when you see them start cooling down and another heater bee takes their place and kicks in, that bee that's used up all that energy to generate that heat does not scoot out through the mantle and get itself onto honeycomb or get itself on a honey cell and start to feed itself. Another bee brings feed to it, and that exchange of nutrition is called trophallaxis. So they're going to stick its tongue out, and it's going to receive its resources from another bee while it sits in place and rests and then goes back to its eating duties. So it's really interesting, the dynamic. Now the bees all have the ability to feed themselves inside the hive on the nutrition that's stored, which is the honey, but they are servicing one another. So bringing water. That's the other thing, inside your hive interior walls where the dew point hits, like where it's really warm and dry, and then it gets down to where it cools down, and that cool air meets the warm air. Condensation occurs. There are bees that go and collect that condensed water and use that to fuel those that are in the cluster. So I hope that answers that question. Moving on to question number 9. Got a lot of questions to get through because, of course, last week I didn't do this. This is from Brad. How do we leave a question for you? Well, you did right here. Also, I got attacked. No fun at all. I tried to pry up the rapid round feeder and it made a huge hammer sound. About 100 bees came for me. Got stung 7 times. This is the first. 2 hours later, I went into an allergic reaction where my nose was closing, my chest was hurting. Benadryl took care of it. I mostly got stung on my legs. And I'm buying a mosquito-type net to put over my jeans. Horrible. Now I'm afraid of my bees. What are ways you used in beekeeping practice to get back on the horse? I would love some suggestions as always. Okay, so here's the thing. A mosquito net for your legs. Here's what I recommend every beekeeper have. And that is a full bee suit. You never know what your bees are going to do. Now, sure, some days you can get away with just a veil and you can go out there in your t-shirt and you can take care of your bees. And but when you get a bad event, just the one day you did one knuckleheaded thing. I'm not saying that Brad did anything knuckleheaded. I'm just saying you drop a whole super. You're looking at a frame and it slips out of your hand and boom, there it goes. And when it fell, it smashed bees, and those bees released alarm pheromones, and off they go. And now your bees that were just loving the fact that you were in there looking at all their stuff, because they love nothing more in opposite land than to have you in their brood looking at all their stuff. So then you get that response and you get stung by a bunch of bees. It's happened to most of us. I mean, I've had bees go after my hand, and like 7 bees in a row sting me on the hand. I'm like, what is their problem? Well, the way you get back on the horse in that case is you suit back up. But now you have to have the proper protective clothing. So every beekeeper needs to be prepared for a bee emergency, right? So even though you might get away 9 times out of 10, 9 months out of 10, you might get away with just walking around with a veil, or in some cases, some people go out there with no veil and no eye protection at all. I would caution people not to take that risk, because the one time that you get stung in the face, this was the eye opener, pun intended. This woman was stung on her eyeball. I don't mean the eyelid. I don't mean her eyebrow. I mean it went to her eye and she didn't close her eye quick enough, and it stung her eye itself. No warning. No noise change in the hive or anything else. One random angry guard bee just right up stung the eye itself. If that isn't enough to get people to wear eye protection and a veil, at least, always have your veil when you're working with your bees. I know we can't be dictators. We can't tell people what they have to wear, but you got to think about what the value is of being exposed all the time. But on the flip side of that, we also, as responsible beekeepers, have to be prepared to be fully protected, because you can't just run away. You're in the middle of an inspection and the bees all cook up, and they call that there's a name for it that I've forgotten, that's like the colony's response when you injure one of their bees. So in other words, a totally laid back colony, you smush one bee by mistake, whatever you're doing, and it releases that alarm pheromone, and all of a sudden the entire hive gets upset, and they move fast, and there's a noise change, and they just go nuts on you. So we need to be ready for that. So how do you get back on the horse? You get right back out there and close up your hive. But here's the other thing, of course, if you've been in your hives too often, and they're starting to get a reaction every time you come near the hive, because bees have great memories, by the way. So the other thing is, any clothing that you are wearing that received a bunch of stings, you don't wear that again when you go back to the colony, because it still has residual alarm pheromone on it. My grandson likes to walk around and show me his little leather mitten, which is a goatskin glove, and shows me the stings he's got in it. I say, well, those are dead bees. Every sting is a dead bee. So I recommend that you get reacquainted with the bees, but that you not harass them. If you're in your bees too often, that can be part of the problem. But every beekeeper needs to, any one of us can walk out there with no bee protection on, but you need to have in your gear shed or wherever you store your beekeeping stuff, your emergency response kit. So that would include full gloves, full bee outfit, straps for your, spats for your ankles, whatever you need to do, big boots. I stick my feet in muck boots, that kind of thing. So you need to be prepared for all levels, but how do you overcome the fear? Knowledge overcomes fear. And knowledge of how the bees responded and why they responded, that overcomes your fear. And some people quit beekeeping after a significant event with their bees. But you have to have the equipment. Protective equipment will give you confidence to go back and understand better. Question number 10. So this question is from Walter Morgan, Titusville, PA. I have 3 hives that are propolis queens. I mean, every little sliver of a crack is filled with propolis. I want to get down into the hive to give them one more inspection this year before it gets really cold. I'm a little worried about breaking open all their sealed up volume. What will be the lowest temps that you would advise is okay to open all this up and give them time enough to heat to put everything back the way I want it? Okay, well, one of the things that changes this time of year if you have to open your hives for any reason, I don't scrape away all the extra propolis and stuff. I leave everything in place. I'm careful to put back everything in exactly the same alignment that it was when I took it off, so I don't reconfigure hives this time of year. And so when the propolis that exists already there, when it comes back together, it's much easier for that to match up, so we don't scrape or clean anything off. And also, do this on the warmest days possible. Have a real reason for getting into your hives. Also, one of the hives has a deep brood box, a medium super, and a deep super, and they are just jam-packed full of bees. Everyone talks about condensing the hive down for winter, and as the summer bees die off and only winter bees are left, they won't be as populated. So should I wait until the population starts to reduce before I take the deep super off, or do it now and crowd them up? Will this make them want to swarm at this time of year? Okay, this time of year swarming would be extremely rare because they don't have any time to prepare for swarming. Usually they prepare a replacement queen before they do the swarming, so I don't think that's a risk. The other thing is, based on the configuration you've described, you have 2 deeps and a medium. The medium is the one I would take out, and I would leave the 2 deeps. And I think you'd be good. Now I've gotten, 2 deeps and a medium is not supersized. If they're wall-to-wall bees, and if all of those frames are full of honey, and the bees are filling every box, I would have a personal tendency to leave them the way they are and not remove anything and not disrupt the propolis. So that's a judgment call, but if all those boxes are full, chock-a-block, top to bottom, but if they're not, and there still is space, and like the lower deep box, if there's space in it, then the box I would remove would be the medium, not the deep. And that leaves you with about 70 pounds of honey if that's wall-to-wall, so that's good for our neck of the woods. Question number 11. Be kind to be free. Today I was planning to check the queen's status and do a final mite check after last month's treatments, and to button up for winter except for emergency sugar and a final OA treatment if needed later this month. I was stunned to see absolutely no brood in not one of my 8 hives. I thought it was early for the bees to be finished making their winter brood, although it would make sense because the forage resources are pretty much done. I thought I'd see capped brood. Until the first frost. I'm pretty sure I didn't manage to go queenless in all the hives at once. All but a few hives are full of bees and do not appear to be weak. Can you confirm your current brood status? I didn't spend a ton of time tearing apart the hives to find the queens, even though it was plenty warm enough today, because temps are supposed to drop this weekend and I don't want to disrupt them any more than necessary this time of year, especially since a few hives still have mites, so regretfully, we'll be treating them one more time. Okay, so right back to what I talked about at the beginning too. If you're broodless and you have mites, oxalic acid vaporization, bam, perfect treatment. Then we get them now, we finish them off, last of the mites. Where there are 100 mites present, there will remain only 3, that kind of thing. But here's the thing, because we just had a beekeeper meeting, and this is regional, so this is up here in northwestern Pennsylvania. We had a beekeeper meeting, and one of our beekeepers, pretty good beekeeper too, 7 out of 8, I believe he said, hives went queenless. Queenless, not just broodless. Queenless. So and I asked if the queens were marked and things like that. He said they were. So that's the other thing, another vote for marking your queens. Because this time of year, they could go broodless and you could still have a queen and everything else could be queen right. Everything could be great. But if you are queenless, you have doomed colonies. They will not survive. They can't make a new queen this time of year. Even though there's some drones still around, I've seen them. But producing a queen this time of year just isn't probably going to happen in this part of the country. So let's hope, let's assume, because this is where we sit around, drink our coffee, and shoot the breeze. Let's just assume. Let's treat them like the queens are there. What do you have to lose? So we have a broodless cycle. We have a broodless period. And one of the ways we can tell this too, by the way, is thermals. So one of the things I'm putting in all my hives, look at these things. There's a company called Broodminder. I have nothing to do with them, by the way. People always, anytime I mention something, oh, you've got something to do with them, you're selling their stuff. I don't care about the company that sells Broodminder stuff. But the one thing I got from Broodminder are temperature sensors. You can get temperature and humidity sensors, right? And these are not that expensive. I think they're 20-something a piece, maybe. This is what they look like. See how thin they are? So these go, and for me, they will go in all my hives. And what they're going to do is they're going to tell me if I have brood in there or not late in the year. So I'm going to know whether the hives are alive or dead based on what this will show me. Now, I last year did temperature and humidity sensors. This year I'm only doing temperature sensors because I didn't want to spend the extra money for the humidity capability. But these are thin enough, they'll sit right on top of the frames, centered, so 10 frame box, centered. You can put them right over your brood box, which would probably be fine, but I'm putting them one up, and they will be over the honey super. And that will inform me. See, when we get these nights where it's 28 degrees or whatever, and you can check these with your cell phone, which now that I've joined the cell phone generation or whatever, I have all the apps that go with it and everything. So each one of these has a unique code assigned to it. You check it on your phone with their app, and you can record all your temperature readings, and that will show me if brood is present. So I'll also know when brood is building, because we know that at the center where the brood is, we're at 94 to 97 degrees Fahrenheit, or 34 to 35 degrees Celsius. So if you can get a temperature sensor on that, you know the brood is present. So without inspecting, we're not going to inspect middle of winter. So the other thing is on the outside I do thermal shots because I want to see where my cluster is located. If they're low in the hive, if they're high in the hive. Because when we get to February, end of February, beginning of March, the clusters are almost all across the board throughout the apiary, right up underneath what will this year be the insulated inner covers, but they're always up at the top because that's the warmest part of the hive, and that's where they're using up the last of their honey resources. So something like that Broodminder temperature sensor would tell us, is brood present? Are they building up? And if the brood goes down, the bees are still in a state of torpor and they still preserve their body warmth, but the temperatures are lower than this target range of 94 to 96 Fahrenheit or 34 to 35 Celsius. So you could put those brood minders near your brood area so you would know then if brood's present. And as the temperatures increase, of course, and the more consistent readings, even though it gets cold outside, they stay the same, you probably have brood and a productive colony, which means you've got a laying queen. So the other thing is there's no guarantee that you still have all your queens, because some people, like last year, lost a bunch of queens out of the blue, which is really weird, but we'll pretend the queens are there because we have nothing to lose. And what I mentioned to the other person at the beekeeper's breakfast was maybe you could take some of the colonies that you know to be queenless and combine them with colonies, of course, that are queen right, and give them more resources and workers going into winter. So they're just options to do, but you could be without queens without seeing them, but I recommend treating them as if they're there because you have nothing to lose. The bees are a loss anyway, so just make sure they have the resources, but we can have temperature sensors that let us know when the brood does become present, because they may have all gone. I mean, I may have colonies without brood right now because we're not inspecting the brood area. We don't know what's going on in there. Temperature sensors would tell the tale. Question number 12, Brenda Durant. Thanks for all the information you share with us. You're welcome. Thanks for watching. I would never have kept my bees alive without you. Could you please clarify for me the number of times we should treat our bees with OA? I thought it was 3 times total, all 1 week apart. When watching Q&A number 129, I thought I heard 5 treatments, 5 days apart. Have I missed a change, or have I been wrong all along, or did I misunderstand what was said in 129? I just did my first treatment October 7th as my mite numbers are too high and I want to get it right again. Thanks so much. Okay, well, mite treatments can be a moving target, but here's the thing. I'm going to clear the haze. It's really easy on this. When it comes to mite treatments, why are we treating? Well, because mites are present. And I do this whenever I give a talk to a group. How many of you treat for mites? Fewer than half the group. How many of you count mites? Even less than that. So people are either treating without even knowing the mite numbers, or they're not treating at all and don't know the mite numbers. So this is how we determine if what we're doing treatment-wise is working or not for your specific hive, in your specific region, in your zone, and with your treatment method of choice. You have to count the mites. So we have to get on the brood frames, we have to get the nurse bees, and you can sugar shake them, or you do alcohol washes, whatever your method is. That's how we prove efficacy, more so even than the method that you've used. So in theory now, so then we talk about the cycles of treatment with oxalic acid vaporization. We used to say 3 treatments, 5 to 7 days apart. And that kind of fell apart when people had higher mite numbers still when they got to the end of their 3rd treatment or their 4th treatment. And then so what they did is they got on this, then some people say, well, treat every 4 days and treat every 5 days. And so then some people just treat. And unless you're counting mites, you don't know if your treatments are effective. On the flip side of that, some people like to say, oh, you did that. Well, that's not going to work at all. You didn't have any impact on your mites. Well, did you count the mites? Well, if you counted the mites and they dropped to less than 1% after you did your treatment regimen, then something worked. If you're not counting mites, we're flying blind. So that's it. And then when you look at your apopioxyl, which is your oxalic acid vaporization resource, that's the oxalic acid that you get to use, that's approved, and if we're following all the guidelines, they talk about dosing, and they don't mention periodicity. So you're left on your own now. So I think the most effective treatments right now have been, if we're following, who got the lowest mite counts at the end of it, 4 or 5 treatments, 5 days apart. And how do you prove it? Counting the mites at the end. Knowing your mite load at the beginning, knowing your mite load at the end of your treatment cycle. Whatever treatment method. That's true if you're using Formic Pro, Mite Away Quick Strips, Apovar, HopGuard, whatever your treatment is. If you don't count mites, you have no idea if your treatment was good or bad. So for Brenda, I used to say 3 treatments, but of course I counted mites at the end of it. If 3 treatments was all it took to get my mites under control, under 3 mites in a 300 300B mite wash, then I'm good. So that's what I would say. So what really matters is the validation, the verification of efficacy for whatever treatment you're using. Because also people are doing other things at the same time. So it's not always, I did this treatment, the treatment was effective, it was fantastic. They also forgot to say that they were pulling drone frames, that they had a brood break, that they had all of these other things going on, because these are contributing factors to your mite numbers either increasing or reducing. So we're talking about some of these other people that have a broodless period right now. Well, they're not going to do 5 treatments 5 days apart if there's no brood present, because this is the whole reason for the rotation of these treatments, is we're trying to get phoretic mites. Those are the mites that are not under the capped larvae. So if you have pupa state bees with caps on them, your oxalic acid vaporization treatment is not going to reach those mites and kill them off. So that's why we have these cycles of treatment, so that once those bees hatch, a mite doesn't come out of a cell that's got a pupa in it. Once that bee hatches and it's got mites on its body, if it was a mite-infected cell, mite-infected larva, then it doesn't come out, turn around, and go immediately back into the next cell. That mite, the new mites, remain phoretic for about 5 days, so they're exposed. And then they move in for their reproductive cycle. The older mites can go back under one right away, but this reproduction is kind of on a 5-day cycle with the newly hatched mites. So it gets kind of complicated, but the bottom line is you're going to count them. But if you have no brood right now, you could do this effectively with a single treatment of oxalic acid vaporization. So how do you get it right? how much brood do you have present, what are your counts before and after. You get it right when your mite counts fall below the threshold that you want, which right now this time of year should be about 1%. So that's 3 mites when you do a sugar shake of 300 bees. Verify it. I know a lot of people, there's people that have never done a mite count. And there's a lot of people that just don't treat at all. There's big beekeepers that don't treat at all. So, guys that I like, there's Jeff Horchaw, Mr. Ed. He treats none of his bees. He is a treatment-free beekeeper because he says his losses are the same as those who treat. So therefore, why treat? So there's somebody who you could check out his channel and ask questions about even treatment-free situations where I found that my treatments were so effective when applied at the right time of year and with the right method, which oxalic acid vaporization. I have Formic Pro. I never used it because I got my mite numbers under control with oxalic acid. How do you know you got them under control? Because I counted the mites. So, and then next year we're using cages for the queens. We're going to create brood breaks, but this is backyard beekeeping. We're not commercial people. Mr. Ed's a commercial beekeeper. So, interesting stuff all around. Question number 13, George Hernandez, Beach Park, Illinois. Let's see, when treating for varroa mites, so again, we're on the mite situation here. When treating for varroa mites, since we can use it with Honey Supers on, would we need to take into effect the supers are on and perhaps use more oxalic acid to cover the space increase? It would also matter the horizontal hive since there's dead space after the follower board. Okay, so really the dosing according to what's on the labels of this stuff is based on the number of brood boxes. So it's not based on the number of honey supers you have. So you're treating the brood area. Why? Because that's where most of your mites are located anyway. So the dosing is associated with brood box areas. If you're doing a horizontal hive, then of course, like the long Langstroth or the Layens hive, then you're prorating that. You know, the dosing is for how many frames of brood you would have. So if I had my horizontal, my long Langstroth hive, and I had 15 frames of brood in there, or 15 frames, yeah. So then that would be a 2 deeps. So you would treat accordingly for that. I can't recommend to people that they go off label. So I know a lot of people are doing that. A lot of people are telling people to do that. I have to give you the right answers, which are to follow the guidelines of the dosing. It's a miticide. It is approved. So you have to follow dosing that's on the labels, and that's based on brood, not the overall size of your hive. The next question is regarding queen confinement cage. Most backyard beekeepers use wooden frames. I would assume one would need to use plastic frames or at least a plastic foundation to prevent the queen from escaping via the passageways. Even if you put the opposite end against the way or follower board, there is bee space on the other end. If working with wax foundation, is it possible for a worker to chew through the wax to free the queen? Okay, so this is about that queen cage that I talked about, which I'm going to be using as part of my integrated pest management next year. So in the spring, after that spring nectar flow, I'll be creating my own artificial brood breaks, and I'm going to be using a queen cage. And so I'm going to create a broodless period. And so what we're talking about here, and what this question is relevant to by George, is this is the cage that goes on a deep Langstroth frame. Now what I really want to show is the configuration of it. It's a queen excluder, really. And of course it folds in on the bottom, folds across the top. We see that we've got these extensions which match the ears or the back side of your frame. So this is for a deep frame. It works on wood or plastic. So this sets in your deep box and goes against the end of the box, which for me will be the eastern side of the box. If some people are going to cage their queen, some people want to put her in the middle of the brood box, and then they would then have to use a follower board to create a solid board along this. But what I want to show real quick is that this works. I think I demoed it with the plastics. There's a plastic deep frame. It goes inside just like this. This is what we're talking about, and notice that that frame matches the length of this. So when it's in the box, both sides are covered and it's up against the end of the box. Therefore, bees, even if they chew through the wax, right? That's the discussion. The queen cannot come out the sides. She cannot come out the bottom because that's covered. She cannot come through the top. That's covered. And then we have the solid end of the deep brood box itself, so nobody's coming out this way. So the other part of the question is, does that work with a wooden frame? So here you have a wooden frame with completely drawn comb. And by the way, if you're going to cage your queen, she needs to have drawn comb because she needs to continue to lay. This all works the same. The wooden pieces here on the ends. This goes right up against the end of the box. And now your queen can continue to lay. She's cared for in here. And I'm changing my periodicity on that. I'm going to leave the queen in here for 14 days. And during that period out here, no eggs are being laid for 14 days as well. So we'll end up with a broodless period. Everything will be uncapped. All the mites will be phoretic. At the end of the 14 days, we'll release the queen. And she can go start laying out here again because we have 9 more days before those get capped, right? So then we'll have a broodless period, a period where there is no capped brood. And when that happens, we have 100% phoretic mites. This gets pulled and thrown away because we don't want these, of course, hatching out. Mites will be going into these because these will be the last brood to get capped. So it's kind of a mite trap at the end of it all. And then we chuck that away. And now we have an entire colony, an entire brood box with no capped brood, and a single dose of oxalic acid vaporization can take those Varroa destructor mites out. So that's what we're talking about. That's what I'm going to do next year. Now, if you're a honey producer, you're not going to do that. You're not going to lose all that time. You're going to do a bunch of chemical treatments, and you're going to get your mites under control, and you're going to stay in honey production. But we're backyard beekeepers. So if we only get 3 gallons of honey off of a hive, and the hive is healthy, and we were able to knock down all of our Varroa mites with a single treatment of oxalic acid vaporization, then that works really well for me. So that philosophy is solid, and that's what we're talking about. So that's it. And by the way, George is Army retired, so thank you for your service. Appreciate that. Question number 14. Next one starts off, hey Chief, same thing. So yes, I'm retired Navy. I was a Chief Petty Officer, LCPO, all that fun stuff. So that's an enlisted person, by the way. Now we're moving on. I have a pretty straightforward question. My hives are in a 10-acre field of still blooming cucumbers. Goldenrod is also in full bloom. I see them bringing in pollen like it's May, but not really increasing their honey stores. I understand that with all the rain we've had here in south central PA, they're having to break into their stores. But is it possible that a plant could have pollen, but imperatively little nectar? Yeah. Bees go after pollen from a lot of different resources, and one of the examples would be like ragweed. Ragweed has no nectar. And how do we know that they're just collecting pollen and not nectar from a plant? Because they're flying on the plant and you don't see their proboscis extend. You don't see their tongue. They're not probing around with their head into the anthers and stuff. So when they're rubbing their bodies all over it and then they're grooming back, and you'll also see them get all over the pollen of a plant and then they'll hover over it. And while they're hovering, you see their hind legs going like this, and then they go back down and they get more of it onto their hairs. And if they're not extending their proboscis, they're not drinking, they're not collecting nectar, and they're not bringing that back. So the other thing is you can look physically at the bees coming in. When you see them coming into your hives on the landing boards and you look at their abdomens, if their abdomens are not fully extended and nice and translucent right behind the thorax, then and they do have pollen balls on their legs, on their corbicula, which is the little adaptation, the indentation on their hind legs that holds the pollen balls. If they don't have that combination, a heavy-bodied bee, extended abdomen, and the pollen balls, then they're just getting the pollen. So likewise, they can go to other plants and only get nectar and not get pollen. A good example of that would be milkweeds. Milkweeds do not offer pollen that the bees can use. It looks like little flippers that hooks itself to their feet and dangles like multiple feet, little tan flipper paddles on there. So it benefits the milkweed, but not the bee. But on the flip side of that, they're getting piles of nectar off of the milkweed, which, by the way, next year, not only am I going to expand the cosmos that I've planted, but my milkweed and swamp milkweed. Here's what was cool about swamp milkweed. Caught me completely off guard last week. I was walking down in the lower meadows there, and this brilliant orange and brilliant yellow milkweed plants were in full bloom, and the pollinators were on them. Now, the bees don't pay a lot of attention to them because there's only a few of them, because the bees like to work areas where there's a high density of the same plant. But the swamp milkweeds are something I'm also going to expand. It's taken 2 years to get that stuff established. Very slow starting, but the long-term benefit is going to be great. Also, anise hyssop, Hyssop, is another great slow starting perennial that is going to be a great nectar and pollen resource for the bees. But the milkweeds are fantastic nectar sources. The cosmos, nectar, and pollen. So anyway, yeah, there are some foragers that go out and get exclusively pollen, and others may even get exclusively nectar, and some get both. So it depends on the plants. So that's the end of question 14. Next is question 15. It's a long one, sorry. This comes from Tim Helmley. I have another question. This week, something tried to get into one of my hives. It consists of 1 deep, 2 supers, and a medium box used for a feeder. They are on a 18-inch rail set up above ground. That 18 inches to your landing board, that's out of skunk range, finally. Something has pushed the top feeder box back about 6 inches, only exposing the inner cover. I'm just now reviewing your video number 88 in anticipation of buying a Wi-Fi cam. So if you have game cameras, trail cameras, stuff like that that you can put on your bee yard, very informative, and you're going to find out what's bothering your bees at night. It's also a lot of fun. In lieu of live cams, do you have any idea what might have done that? I'm in the lower half of Michigan's Lower Peninsula, so we have no bears here. Could a skunk get that high? No, skunks don't climb. They're terrible climbers. Aside from strapping them, should I do anything else? This is the first time I've discovered any of my hives have been tampered with. So the reason I address this question today is because I did see possums climbing the hives, which was interesting. Skunks like to stay on their hind feet and reach up. That's how we got that 18-inch max height. But the other thing is I do want to talk about strapping your hives because we're going into winter. Shipping straps. Strap your hives together. So even if your hives blow over, they're going to stay intact on their side or on their face and give you time to get that hive back up on its stand. So strapping them down really well onto its support system is going to be important. We had 50, 60 mile an hour windstorms last winter. So that's kind of what we're preparing for is extreme wind conditions. We try to put our hives in places that are sheltered by wind, sheltered from wind, but that's not always possible. And sometimes raccoons and other animals get curious and they try to get into your hives. Even a deer can walk up, nose around, but usually once they hear the bees make their voo, once they make some audible sound there, the deer kind of, whoa, what's that? But even deer will poke around and they're tall enough to do that. So they're just checking to see what things are. They're curious. Skunks can get in if they're low enough, but possums can climb. And I've heard stories about raccoons bothering hives, but I've never had raccoons here where I live. Even though raccoons are cruising through the area every single night, I've never paid attention to the beehives. So trail cameras and things like that, motion activated cameras, huge benefit. If it's near your house and you can use cameras like the Arlo systems and things like that. But what I wanted to put out relevant to this question today was a reminder about shipping straps, not just rocks and stuff sitting on top of your hives. Shipping straps can save them even when a storm blows them over. So I lost 8 out of 8 hives my second year of beekeeping due to a winter storm that came through and blew them all right off of their support system. And they were all face down in the snow and each box broke apart a few inches. So there they were, exposed to the wind and the cold and everything else. 100% loss of the bees. Preventable. because I had the T-posts in the ground and the horizontal steel conduit that they were all sitting on. If I had just put shipping straps that clip them to those T-posts and those support horizontal metal conduit pieces, then nothing would have blown them over. So live and learn. Early lesson there that was very sad. Question number 16, David Love. Follow up on the bees not removing the capping after draining the honey from the flow hive frames. They have started to remove the capping about 2 days later. Slow, but now done. I watched one of your older videos when you did your first drain of the honey on your flow hive. The honey leaked into your hive and the bees moved out of the hive. On another video, you drained the same 3 frames in the same flow hive with no leaks of honey into your hive. My question is, did you have the same problem with your other flow frames on your other flow hives? I'm having this problem with one of my hive frames. Okay, so for those of you who don't know flow hives, they use that. This is a flow hive right back here, flow hive 2. They have special frames in them that are mechanized. This is what they look like. That's a flow frame right there. So they're plastic. A lot of people, they don't just dislike them. There's people that hate them because they're plastic and because honey comes out easy and things like that. But anyway, I have these. I have a lot of them. And we have flow supers. And when you pull off the back, you activate the top, which moves every other leaf in this. It creates an open cell situation. So here's the cells. They're full of honey. The bees have sealed them all up, and they put a wax capping over it, just as they do the cells in the hive. When you activate it, it goes like this, and the honey is supposed to drain down through this and come out this hole, which is why your hive tilts back about 2 degrees, and the honey just runs out. Now here's the thing. So the first time I did this, some of the honey ran down the face over the surface of this and dripped down into the hive. And then, of course, the bees that are inside the hive got out of the way. So I had this massive, first of all, the hives that produce honey in these are your biggest colonies, your most populated colonies, and your most productive colonies. So then they moved out, and they were outside for most of the night. And while inside, they're, of course, cleaning up and reclaiming the dripping honey inside. So it's one of the reasons I actually like solid bottom boards in hives that have flow supers on them, even though like that flow hive 2 back here has a screen bottom board and it's got a tray inside that collects drippings now. So the drippings go right through it and they're collected in the tray if they drip at all. So the question is, why does it drip sometimes and not others? Well, it's an easy answer now because I've been using these for 5 years. When the bees cap the frames, once they're capped, honey won't leave these cells. When you open them, the cappings remain intact, and this is also one of the reasons that people get so mad about the flow hives. You just took away their honey, and the bees don't even know that the honey went out of there, and now they're expecting honey to be there, and when they open the caps, there's no honey. They know when the honey's gone. Residents, whatever the reason is, walking over the surface, they know when it's gone. But just as with normal extraction of other frames, when we're pulling honey supers and things like that, because I do both, I do traditional extraction, and I do flow extractions. If only 80% of this is capped, most beekeepers would harvest the frame. But with the flow hive, that 20% that's uncapped, when you activate these cells because it's gravity draining, without the cappings present over all of these cells, some of the honey, because it runs down here, it runs down too fast and starts to leak out over the surface instead of being held in by the wax cappings, which allows it to drip down and keeps it together until it comes out only through the trough at the bottom. So any of the open cells over here have the risk of leaking out, and then the honey just runs down and into your tray, onto your solid bottom board, or something like that. So by waiting until the frames are entirely capped, that's when you have little to no dripping at all. So over the years, that's what I learned, is that I just wasn't waiting for the bees to cap all the way to the very end and make sure that the entire frame is capped. Now, is it detrimental if some of that honey drips down into the hive? In my opinion, no, it's not really. And that's because the bees reclaim it and they put it right back in the cells anyway. And they'll use it to restructure the cells that you've just drained. So sometimes the recovery time is really fast. We've drained off frames like that, and each one of those frames yields a half a gallon of honey when it's full. And then within 11 days, they'll have it full of honey again and capped again. So it's actually interesting. The first cycle is the longest and the most difficult to get them to do, but after they've used them and after they've had honey cycle through them and the wax cappings have been reused there to some degree, they don't remove and dispose of it. They reuse a lot of the wax caps too. So initially I saw the bees in my first cycling of this in 2016, 15 or 16. Anyway, when they first did it, I saw bees dropping wax cappings on the bottom of the hive and some bees flying away with it. So I made the assumption that they were removing all of the wax cappings and removing them from the hive, but they weren't. A lot of them, they were recycling and just sticking it adjacent while they filled the cells again, and then using a lot of the existing wax and amending it with new wax also. So it's very interesting stuff, but in subsequent times, that's the reason they leak. The question is how much leaking occurs and then what happens to it. If you've got screen bottom boards, bad news, because the honey can get out of the hive and it leaks and other bees in the area smell the honey. Now you've got a robbing situation on your hands. So solid bottom boards with flow hives, because it's tilted back, not tilted front towards your landing board where the honey would run out, then your bees are in a contest for their own honey. As long as they're tilted to the back, it stays at the back, and the bees have time to reclaim it and recycle it into the hive. Also, the Flow Hive 2 versions that have those bottom trays that are inside, the honey goes into the tray, and that can be reclaimed, which is also why I always tell people to clean up those trays really well before you do your honey cycling, because then if it goes in the tray, you can still use the honey that you collected. So that's that. Question number 17. Last question of the day. I only had 2 coughing fits. That's not bad. Angela Cross, can you explain the difference between bee escapes and hive gates? Yes. Those are 2 different functions. A hive gate is what we talked about at the beginning today, which is this new invention out of New Zealand, which helps our bees defend themselves, among other things. So the hive gate is an entrance to your hive, and this is the purpose of this is just to help your bees defend their hive against invading wasps. It also has other benefits which deal with ventilating the hive, warming the hive, winter wind exposure, and things like that, because the wind doesn't just blow into your hive through a narrow opening anymore. It has to travel the corridor, which protects your bees from being buffeted by extreme winds. Now, where I live, we get high wind conditions, horizontal rain, horizontal snow, sleet, hail, everything. So that will be an interesting part for mine, but one is an entrance. Now, when we talk about bee escapes are just boards, and I can't believe I don't have one in here. But a bee escape is if you have a honey super, let's say, and we got to get the bees out of it. So a bee escape is a board that you put underneath the honey super. It usually has escape cones built into it. One of them is called the Great Escape by Ciracell Company. And then there are the ones that have the triangle screens underneath of them, so the bees go out the triangle corners and they don't get back in. And so they can't get back up into the honey super, and that's the point, to get the bees to escape a super, and then it moves them out. And that's it. So an escape is to clear a super or get bees out of a box for whatever reason. And then, of course, the hive gates are just entrances to the hive. So they're not a one-way thing, they're a two-way thing. So that's it for today. I thank you for being here, and I hope you learned something. And we might be doing live Q&As again coming soon. I haven't done those for several months. Don't forget to click like so that you'll remember that you saw this before. And remember that be prepared to transition from syrups to dry feeding. Once the temps start getting below freezing, no point in putting syrup up there anymore, and you should be feeding heavy syrup, if at all, this time of year, and then go to the dry feed. Don't forget to insulate your hive, so put insulated covers on if you can, and I hope you get your bees through winter well. So I'll see you next Friday. Thanks for being here today. Have a great weekend.